On today's show, we are breaking down my final rankings of USHL prospects for the 2025 NHL draft as part of the Elite Prospects final ranking and the draft guide that's going to be coming out in just about 2 weeks' time.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down exactly why I am the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, because we'll be digging into the work I've been doing this season and the final takes I came up with in our draft rankings. Our final ranking meeting is now behind us. It's one of the big reasons that we've had a hiatus here on the channel. I mean, I have not uploaded since like the early part of May here, but I'll be doing a lot of catch up here. We'll be getting a lot of episodes in before the end of the month. So stay tuned for all of that. We've got a two-parter here breaking down the rankings. Today, we'll be looking at the overall class, how it fares as a USHL draft group, as well as the top 20 players in the rankings, whereas the next episode is going to be focusing on wrapping up the top 50. I ranked 50 players, so we'll just be doing 10 players per segment there on the next show. But today, we'll be kicking things off here in the first segment by looking at the overall draft class, looking at the biggest names here that I have just loved watching this season and see as very projectable talents for various reasons to the NHL level. And then we'll be continuing the show through the second and third segments by breaking down the overall other players there that round out my top 20. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into the show here. And it's going to be a jam-packed episode, so grab yourself something to sip on and lean back and enjoy. So the USHL draft class this year is a fascinating one. There are swaths of talent, especially in the late first, early second round range. There's a ton of options that I think have real merit in the maybe that 30 selection range of picks between 25th overall and 55th overall. There's just a lot of skill that really is in that tier. But what is lacking is a true elite level prospect this season in the USHL. There's no Macklin Celebrini. There's no James Higgins who was playing in this league last season. These types of players are not in the USHL this year, and we'll see if that's a trend that continues now with the NCAA decision to allow CHL talent in. There's a lot less, I guess, pull that the USHL has to keep and acquire these elite level players. And this year we're seeing a result of that, where even the NTDP didn't even crack my top three. No NTDP player cracked the top three of my USHL rankings. There are three players that I think have arguments in the first round, and two that I would really pick in the first round among the program group this season. But there isn't this overwhelming amount of talent coming out of this region here this season. What you do have, however, is a diverse selection of potential role players who have a wide array of high-end strengths and also some key weaknesses that might be some hurdles for them before they can reach the NHL. At number one here, my favorite player in the USHL among draft eligibles this season. He's really just had a stranglehold on that spot going back to February for me. And that's Václav Nestrašil of the Muskegon Lumberjacks, the recent Clark Cup winning Muskegon Lumberjacks just a couple days ago. And Nestrašil's been playing a really important role on this team all year long. The production isn't quite the same extent as other players in this grouping, including his own teammate, Ivan Ryabkin, who has been outscoring him since coming over from Russia. What Nestrašil brings is a combination of a high floor, some real runway to explore a higher ceiling, and he's still kind of growing. This guy was listed at 6'5" earlier in the year. He's at 6'6" now, and he's only 190 pounds. He's still quite lean for his frame, and he has been average of the pack in terms of size for almost his entire hockey career up until the last couple seasons. So growing a physical game has been a much more recent development for this player. And this season, especially in the playoffs, it's become a real strength. This guy works incredibly hard, vicious on the forecheck, very disruptive defensive stick, solid defensive positioning. He brings a real 200-foot game from the wing, and that handling skill, the playmaking creativity have real runway to become plus level NHL tools and carry him to a second line role in terms of ceiling. First line in terms of like a contending team is a bit more difficult to project with this player, but he could maybe play a complementary role in the right system. But we're mainly talking about a really solid power forward on a second line in terms of NHL upside, with a fantastic fallback game to play in a bottom six capacity if that skill doesn't quite elevate him to the next level. Before I forget, let me just pull up my rankings here on screen for you watching on YouTube if you want to follow along. They're going to be right here next to my face. And today, again, we're just going to be looking at the top 20 guys, but this is my full top 32 among USHL players, and you're going to see the full top 50 tomorrow. So let's move on to number 2, and this has been a big riser on my board here in the later stretch especially, and that's Ryker Lee. By far the most skilled player available among USHL like draft eligibles this season. It's not even close. The handling skill is top 5 in the entire draft class, including your Mises and Hagens and whatnot. He's right up there in terms of handling ability, in traffic, in open ice, doesn't matter. Such an adaptable puck handler, very creative, very, just difficult to pin down, and he's evasive through his handling, but the skating needs to take a step in the coming seasons. But what is a hopeful thing there, because the stride has been very ugly to watch this season. It's been among the worst among the whole draft class of notable players that are contending to be picked in the top 2 rounds. But what's very, very important to note here is that this is a player who is still growing. He's grown about 6 inches in the last 2 or 3 years, and he's still actively adding height to his frame. So he's still very much catching up to skating with this new weight, with this new height. This is all still very new to him, and he's gained significantly in terms of power as well in his skating throughout the course of this season. And that, I think, the trajectory that we've seen that moving along with this season is quite hopeful in terms of his projection, as that has been his main area of weakness. Later in the season, this is a guy that was able to layer in significantly more physicality and overall just like grit on the forecheck, some aggressive stick work, pinning bodies, really getting his body engaged in play defensively as well as offensively, which is another area that was a bit more hit and miss earlier in the year. But what he really brings is a trifecta of offensive puck skills. I think his shot is really, really good. It's a bit more divisive among our scouting staff at Elite Prospects, with others viewing it as a more average kind of projection. But I see real power, especially on the one-timer with Ryker Lee. I think that his goal scoring is going to still take a step and a half when he continues to expand his game and use his feet to open up scoring lanes more often. But he's very deceptive in using both his scoring and his playmaking ability together to open up chances and open up spaces. And that playmaking skill is really, really, really good as well. Probably the best among all USHL draft eligibles this season as well. So you have multiple high-end offensive tools with Ryker Lee. He thinks the game very well. He's clever. The skating has to take a step. The defensive impact isn't the highest end right now, but there are some things to work on with those tools that he has at his disposal. And overall, he's a player, I think, that has a lot of runway in his development. He could really take some significant steps, and he's off to a very good development program at Michigan State University in the NCAA, where he's going next season. And for a player who scored 31 goals and 68 points in 58 games this season, winning Rookie of the Year honors in the USHL, there's a lot of reasons to take a swing on this guy in the late first round. The skill level's really high end. If the skating's able to catch up a bit more over the coming season, you're going to see redrafts where he's going easily within the top 15. So this is a kind of risk I'd be also very happy to consider a bit earlier on in the first round if your big skill swings are no longer available on the board. But to wrap up this segment, a very, different profile of player that I wanted to headline, and that is Jacob Rombach, a 6'6" left shot defenseman. Skates decently well, but his skating does need a little bit more fine tuning before he's going to project as a true play killer in the NHL. But what he does bring is a really high end combination of defensive stick work, rush defending habits, positional awareness, and retrieval ability. He's constantly scanning the ice. He has a really good mental map of what's going on around him, both the location of his teammates and of opponents. And that comes together wonderfully on retrievals, where he's able to solve rather complex problems without a real high end like puck skill. He's not like an elite level passer or an elite level handler in any way, shape, or form. But what he is very intelligent and aware and just makes sound decisions under pressure. Other elements that have to take a step is his physicality and actually using it, implementing it to create advantages more regularly. He's so big, but the actual usage of that has been rather passive during longer stretches of the season. So there's clear areas where he's going to have to grow and expand his game, but the upside as a play-killing second pairing defenseman, I think, is really quite clear with Jacob Rombach. So he's a player that ends at number 3 in my USHL rankings. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we'll wrap up the top 10 before moving on to the 11 through 20 range in the final segment. So we'll explore just how much of a dog Jack Murtagh is, the goal-scoring winger from the NTDP, to kick off the next segment.
An award-winning mattress can change your life. I speak from experience. It happened to me. After years of uncomfortable sleeps, I recently switched to Bear Mattress, and the results were instant. Bear Mattress is designed with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. I used to deal with night sweats, but Bear's best-in-class cooling ensures optimal temperature regulation, which prevents overheating and helps me stay comfortable all night long. Bear offers a wide variety of mattresses, but to get the right one for you, take their sleep quiz that matches you to your perfect mattress based on body type and sleep preferences. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout to get 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com. Use my promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
All right, let's keep the show rolling here in the second segment, rolling through the top 10 rankings of my USHL draft class here this season. And there's more players in this batch that bring flashes of skill, but it's not just quite as refined as the first players that we talked about there in the last segment. So let's kick things off at number 4 with Jack Murtagh from the U.S. National Team Development Program. And he is just such a hard-working, reliable player, dangerous goal scorer, really heavy shot, but he brings also a level of playmaking or play connecting game that grew significantly as the year went on, where he was much less of a single threat attacker. He's bringing a lot more deception into his offensive zone puck touches and threatening to use his playmaking skill to set up teammates like Richard Gallant and Cole McKinney at even strength, who he played with all year long. And the chemistry those guys had together played a big role, I think, as well in Jack Murtagh expanding the game the way that he did over the course of the season. He brings reliable defensive energy and a propensity for driving straight at defenders, going through their sticks, through their hands, and just barreling down the middle lane in the offensive zone. The middle drive, the goal scoring skill, these are real big elements in his game that I think deserve a first round selection on draft day at the tail end of the round. Then at number 5, I have his teammate, William Moore. He is a center/left wing who is a lot more raw than Jack Murtagh is, but the skill is really quite impressive when things fall together for this player. The handling skill plus level, the playmaking ability, really quite impressive at times. He's an overall very intelligent player. He's a creative thinker. He finds creative solutions to the problems that he encounters. But what he isn't at this point is a consistent physical player. The energy, the motor, the stamina, the strength, these are all still works in progress for him. He's so lean, he's still so lanky. When he fills out his frame, he's going to have a very different impact night to night than he's having right now. So ranking this player this high at 5th among all USHL draft eligibles is also a swing on these things falling into place for this player and his game becoming more cohesive in the coming seasons. But as currently constituted, he's not the 5th best player among this group, but I think that he will become down the road because, again, with that intelligence, with a really, really, really good shot as well, like that shooting ability could become a real center point to his game at the next level. There's so many things that can go right, I think, in his development, especially if he lands with a team that has some patience in developing him and has a hands-on approach in channeling his development in the right direction. At number 6, we have one of the more dynamic players among USHL draft eligibles, and that's Benjamin Kevan of the Des Moines Buccaneers, a right shot winger who plays with incessant pace, dynamic handler, dynamic playmaker, constantly switching angles, implementing delays. He outworks the opposition very often. The feet never stop moving, and he's just a very difficult player to kind of pin down and contain. So those elements have made him a really, really skilled and fun player to watch in my viewings all year long. And when he did play with the NTDP for certain stretches of the year, he was restricted to a 4th line checking role, which is just not his best game. He's at his best when he can really flourish with skill and puck touches and push defenses back. So he's a guy I think has some second line upside if things really go to plan, but also with that motor has a fallback game to be a depth skill producer in a bottom 6 at the NHL level. Moving on to number 7, we have Mason West, a player that still hasn't actually picked a sport just yet. He's a dual sport athlete between football and hockey. He's a quarterback in football, and he, I think, threw for like 37 touchdowns and 3 interceptions with Edina High School this season, and is about the 160th ranked quarterback in the nation going into college here this season. But he's, I think, a much more unique and interesting prospect in hockey than he is in football. That 6'6" frame paired with really, really noteworthy mobility, fluidity, and agility make him an adaptable skater who's still learning to use his body and to get low to gain leverage along the wall in board battles. So the physical runway with him, I think, has a really, really, really like a bunch of headroom, basically. I think he could grow significantly over the coming seasons, and he adds flashes of real handling skill, using his reach to hook passes around outstretched defensive sticks. And overall, I think that with a combination of skill, playmaking, awareness, and the skating at that size, he's a really unique player. And by the time the draft rolls around, we're going to know if he's committing to hockey or to football. And if it's hockey, this is easily an early 2nd round range bet and even a late 1st round range kind of candidate, because he's so unique. He has a long way to go in terms of his development, but the upside is quite tantalizing. At number 8, we have Cole McKinney from the National Team Development Program, just a hard-working, meat and potatoes two-way center. I think he's a very linear projection to be a bottom 6 center in the NHL. In terms of that energy, he's among the highest workers, hardest workers on the NTDP this season, and he just brings this incessant pace on puck. He's become a really good play connector as well as a passer in transition. Good finishing ability in tight, can really elevate pucks from right around the blue paint, and he's a guy I think has a lot of room to grow as well as a net front presence at the next level, and that makes him an early 2nd round range pick in my book. Charlie Trethewey, sticking with the NTDP, is a highly mobile right shot defenseman who I have ranked between 40th and 50th overall. He's a guy whose skating is among the best in the entire draft class of any player from any position. And on top of that, he's an August birthday, so very young for the class. He's raw, still has a lot to kind of come together in his game. But as the year wore on, he flashed more and more shutdown kind of elements in his game, and using his mobility and physicality to kill play along the boards, stepping up in the neutral zone, being a really good blue line defender, and overall just playing a more like low event style of hockey than he played earlier on the year, where he was like mostly playing hot potato with the puck, and it was constant turnovers and dangerous areas and a lot of elements that were very worrisome to seeing from a scouting perspective. But he was able to fine tune and iron out a lot of those deficiencies as the year wore on. Still hasn't been a spectacular player in terms of skill, but still a guy that has some runway with a heavy shot in the offensive zone. He's a player I've liked quite a bit down the stretch. But to wrap up the segment, we have Ivan Ryabkin of the Muskegon Lumberjacks, a very divisive player who did an entire scouting breakdown on. If you want to listen to that, I can link that up in the cards above if you're watching on YouTube, or in the description down below if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform. And he's a player that brings a real rampant physicality to the equation. He's aggressive. He chases hits. He finishes his checks. Real heavy kind of game, despite just being about 6 feet tall, and flashes of high-end playmaking as well, but almost entirely at low speeds, at low paces. He slows the game down, looks at his options, and can fire a pinpoint pass through multiple sticks. So there's that passing ability that is quite impressive, but being able to do it at pace, through contact, in tight areas, these are still things that have to blossom in order for Ryabkin to come close to a second line kind of upside in the NHL. I think it's more likely that he's a play connecting, physical shutdown like center on a third line if he's able to get that defensive motor and those defensive reads more consistent. And that's going to need some real work, because the motor has been a big area of concern with this player, but still there's enough flashes in his game to still keep him in this second round range, even though I struggle to see the arguments to pick him inside the first round. But that wraps up this second segment. In the final one, we'll wrap up the show with picks 11 through 20, and we'll be discussing why guys like LJ Mooney and Anthony Allain-Samaké are some really underrated names in this year's draft class. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you fueled all day long. Personally, I love the no shells variety. They're the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, pistachios are my absolute favorite snack. And if you loved cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, Wonderful Pistachios also offers the in-shell variety for all of that satisfying sensory experience. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All righty, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment with the last 10 names I want to run through today. And it's going to be a bit more of a quick fire as a result of that. But if you want to learn more and hear more of my thoughts on any of these players, if you have an Elite Prospects premium subscription, just go over onto any of these guys' profiles on Elite Prospects and looking at the scouting report section. I've written hundreds this season, so more formulated thoughts in a bit more of a formal setting you can find over there. But kicking things off here at number 11, we have a big 6'6" right shot defenseman, Sean Barnhill. And he's a mid-second round option, maybe later half of the second round option for me, because he brings that size. He has a lot of physical runway in terms of using aggression and violence to keep play to the outside. It's a bit more of a work in progress with him, so we're projecting that improving down the stretch. But what he does bring is real high-end mobility. Not quite Charlie Trethewey level of skating, but it's not too far off. He's a 6th grade skater by our projections at Elite Prospects, and we go by a 9-point scale in terms of evaluating our tools, where 5 is an NHL average projection, basically just baseline NHL player. So Barnhill is quite clearly a plus level skater by our valuation. On top of that, he brings some really good habits, I think, in terms of stepping up against the rush and using his body to take some space and time away from his opposition. And at times he can flash a real ability to finish his check quite violently and get the crowd roaring a little bit, but the consistency behind that and the overall comfort of using his physicality in any situation still has to improve for him to kind of hit that number 4, number 5 NHL defenseman ceiling that I see him having. At number 12, we have an opposite kind of defenseman. Also a tremendous skater, maybe even better than Sean Barnhill. That's Everett Baldwin, who played a couple games with the NTDP at the end of the season, and I loved what he showed in those performances. He's quite physically involved despite being undersized. He's about 6 feet tall, if I'm not mistaken, but he gets low, he initiates contact, he gains leverage in tight, and overall a fairly effective net front defender in what I saw. And also to do that in some of the first games he even played at this level of hockey, playing mainly at the high school level this season, is very impressive to see. And there are some flashes of offensive activations that are very dynamic. Handling skill is also a plus level projection. There's enough tools here for this player to become a second pairing offensive defenseman in the NHL, but it's going to be a bit of a longer term project. Give it 5 years, maybe. I think it'll take some time, but there is real potential with Everett Baldwin, and it makes him my top offensive defenseman among all USHL draft eligibles this season. Moving on, we have Carter Amico of the NTDP, who missed almost the whole season to injury following a pretty freak injury there in November, where he just put weight on his right knee and it just gave way, and he needed real surgery to repair that. So there are some concerns on the injury side with Carter Amico, but what he does bring is a real level of combination of mobility, like power in his legs especially, physicality, and defensive awareness. He's a really clever defender. He's able to hide his reach before going for a poke check and channel rushes towards the outside. A lot more of the question marks I had in my viewings this season came on puck instead, in terms of decision making with his passing and the decisions behind when he goes for a little curl and drag to get around an outstretched stick, which he can execute quite nicely. I think the handling has some runway to improve down the stretch, but the actual timing of those implications was always a bit erratic. And overall, he's a guy I think still needs a lot of refining. He's quite raw, especially missing this entire season almost to injury. He's going to need some patience as well in his development. And that, alongside the concerns of injuries just becoming a recurring theme with this player, pushed him down to the bottom second round in my range. But moving on, we have Edison Engle, a left shot defenseman playing with the Dubuque Fighting Saints in the USHL. He's a very good skater, powerful lower body, very refined stride mechanics, moves around the ice with real fluidity. He's just at home there on the ice, but he's still kind of finding his niche and his role at this level. He does a little bit of everything, solid enough rush defender, gets involved in the breakout, can use his mobility to just get a couple really powerful lateral strides in to open up passing lanes and bomb a puck up ice. These are all things he's able to do, but really finding what he's best at, that's not quite established just yet. But to me, that's also slightly an exciting prospect for a guy who skates so well and has different areas that could become key components of his game, whether it be defensively and taking space away off the rush, or offensively in activations through the neutral zone and gaining the zone offensively. He's not going to be a really dynamic offensive threat, but he's a good play connector in the offensive zone. So he's a fun player to keep an eye on in this early third round range. Then we have LJ Mooney of the NTDP, just a dynamic puck rusher with excellent handling ability, especially at speed, and his motor just never stops. He's one of the more dogged players I've watched this season in my region. Just an incessant attacker. He's constantly trying to prod at defenses and find a way inside, but at the same time, he's also a player who's been overhandling the puck a bunch this season, making some really, really immature decisions in possession in terms of trying to cycle around the offensive zone like 3 times and not really implementing delays into his rushes to slow things down to open up passing lanes. It's just kind of push the pace higher and higher and higher and higher. It's going to be key for this player to learn how to slow things down sometimes and to be a bit less predictable in what he's trying to do on puck rather than to just push until it doesn't go anymore. So he's a guy that's going to have to get fine-tuned in order to make it to the NHL. But even though he's far from a sure thing to make the league, if he does, he could be a second line transition kind of playmaker who brings a real degree of handling and incisive playmaking to the equation while being one of the hardest workers on the ice at all times, because he has to be at 5'7". So he's a player to keep an eye on, but we'll see where he goes on draft day. He might slip all the way to the 7th round. I would not be too surprised. Then we have Cooper Simpson, who played at the end of the season with Tri-City, and he's a guy that brings a bunch of tools to the equation. He's a very good skater, a very good puck handler, has a wicked release. All these things are well above average in terms of projection, but the habits are still a bit more raw. Certain games he works quite hard and he plays a checking role. Other games he kind of floats around and waits for his defense to create a turnover in order to bomb up ice and create that offensive threat. So he's a guy that is still kind of finding his niche, but with the level of tools that he has at his disposal, the runway he has by having mainly played high school hockey this season and still kind of needing to get acclimated to this next level, while still having been able to show that he's among the more dangerous offensive players on the ice as soon as he arrived in the USHL at the end of the season, scoring like 6 goals in 9 games or something along those lines. There's a lot to look forward to with this player in terms of projection. Think of him as like a less dynamic and perhaps less raw version of Trevor Connolly from last year. He's not the same kind of player in terms of true dynamic offensive sequences and manipulating constantly left and right and showing that he can score from any little place in the offensive zone. The tools are definitely a step below that level, but what he does bring is a bit more intensity, a bit more reliability, I would say, in all 3 zones, while still being, in terms of an archetype, a little bit similar of a player who excels off the rush, still has to learn to create off the cycle and at even strength, but is a really, really good power play scorer and brings a lot of skill to the equation. At 17th overall, we have Mace'o Phillips from the U.S. National Team Development Program, a guy that brings just incessant physicality. He may be the most physical player among all USHLers this season, among draft eligibles at the very least, and he's a real like difficult customer while he's closing in on you and you're trying to squeeze by him along the boards. One weakness he has is kind of that lateral mobility, so he gets beat wide sometimes, but if you're not going to beat him wide, you're going to get absolutely hammered into the boards. So he's a player whose physicality is just going to create a basis for like a number 6, number 5 defenseman in the NHL who has a specialty as a physical shutdown defender who gets more minutes come playoff time than he does in the regular season. And I think that profile has real value here in the 3rd round range, especially in this year's draft class where the players with a real likelihood of hitting the NHL really seem to fall off around this range of the draft. But at 18, we have Anthony Allain-Samaké, a Montreal native playing with Sioux City in the USHL, and I have him ranked between 80th and 85th in terms of range on draft day. I think there's real value with him in the 3rd round, but he may well be available through the 4th and 5th round of the draft as well. And he's quite young for the class. He's very raw. So a lot still has to come together, but he's a September 10th birthday, just 5 days off of the cutoff for the 2026 draft. So envision this as a player that is basically eligible for next year's draft, but we can get him this year already with just that 5 days off the cutoff. And he's a very good skater, especially in terms of the edge work and the fluidity. He's really like one with the ice in those situations when he's trying to turn and redirect his momentum. But where he struggles more is in terms of the consistency of his stride mechanics, the power he's able to generate through his lower body. He's still physically very underdeveloped. But again, he's so young. These things are going to grow. And what he brings on top of that is a real sense of offensive activations. He's constantly prodding down the left flank in the offensive zone, especially on weak side activations, becoming a shooting threat. The shot isn't a threat. It's not what I'm saying. It's a mechanically good muffin, I would call it. There's just no power behind it, but the mechanics are good enough. But once he adds some upper body strength, he might be able to actually pot a couple goals here and there, which he didn't really do this season. Then for the second to last player of today's episode, we have Teddy Mutryn of the Chicago Steel. He's a right shot winger, can play center as well. I think he's a good bet in the 3rd round and can see the arguments for him as high as like the late 2nd round even, because he brings a combination of power, checking habits, and intensity. Two-way, overall, like 200-foot game. He's constantly working, going up and down the ice. Good shot for sure. Like the shot, I think, is a 5.5 projection in terms of that 9 points tool grade scaling that we have at Elite Prospects. There's good power behind it. Still quite raw, I think, in terms of layering all these things together for a cohesive offensive impact. But he's able to, I think, be a fourth line checking winger at minimum if he's able to elevate all these tools to NHL standard over his college career. And then there's still some like third line upside to grow beyond that if the scoring game can take a step or two. But to wrap up the show, and the last player here of the episode at 20th overall, we have Adam Benák, a highly intelligent, hard-working 5'7" player playing with the Youngstown Phantoms here in the USHL. And he's a player I would love to hear about your opinions down below, because he's incredibly divisive. Some have him as a potential first-round candidate. Others have him as a player they wouldn't touch with a 9-foot pole on draft day in any round, even the 7th. So he's a player that has a wide array of different takes going around him, and I think I fall somewhere in the middle. I see the risk. He's not a sure thing at all for the NHL, especially at his size, but I think the motor goes a long way to compensate for that. And he's going to have to get to the middle of the ice with a lot more frequency and consistency if he's going to make the NHL long term. But I'm hoping that with some more filling out of his frame, he'll be more able to withstand physical contact in tight, because he has that intensity to play in those areas, has one-touch playmaking ability. He's very clever. He's very aware, constantly scanning the ice, head on a swivel. These are all elements that are going to help him at the next level. Defensive intensity has also been there during different stretches of the season, and I think he looked significantly better playing on the wing late in the year compared to playing at center. That's where he's able to really spend time in his favorite playmaking pockets, right around the hash marks along that right circle. And getting him there more often, I think, makes him a much more dangerous offensive player. But again, this is a junior style production as it currently is built. He's going to have to be a lot more middle driven, play inside contact, withstand heavy cross checks from bigger, heavier opponents in order to make that next step to the NHL. But if he does make it, the playmaking could really elevate him to a middle six playmaking role. But just again, a lot of hurdles between here and that point. So I'd love to hear from you down below about any player I covered here today. What are your thoughts on the rankings that I have here? Who do you think should have cracked my top 20? And again, we have another episode coming out maybe today or tomorrow, breaking down the rest of my rankings from 21 all the way through to 50th overall of the USHL guys. And that concludes all the players I think really have earned draft selections in the USHL this season. So that concludes this breakdown of my top 20 players, and a whole lot of work went into it this season. So I'd very much appreciate a like, a comment, a subscribe, or a share, whatever you can give. I'd really appreciate it for this episode. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. I'm your host, Sebastian High, and thank you so much for tuning in as always.